You know that feeling when you check your bank account and instead of that little punch in the gut, that low-grade anxiety that lives in your chest every single Monday morning, you actually smile? Like genuinely smile? Most people reading this right now have never felt that. And I don't say that to be harsh. I say that because I've been there, and because almost every financial guru on the internet is telling you to do things that will never, ever get you to that moment. They're telling you to cut your lattes, track every dollar, budget like a monk, and somehow the math will work out. And look, I'm not saying that stuff is useless, but here's the uncomfortable truth they're not telling you. The game doesn't actually change when you cut expenses. The game changes when your money starts making money faster than you can spend it. And there is one specific milestone, one number where that shift becomes so real, so undeniable that people who hit it describe it almost like a personality change. That number is $500,000. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what happens when you get there, why the next $500,000 arrives in a completely different timeline than the first, and why understanding this one rule could be the most important thing you do for your financial life this year. My name is Nico, and this is the Nico Decodes channel, where we talk about practical, no BS personal finance for real people with real salaries who are tired of feeling like they're running on a treadmill that never stops. If you're new here, welcome. Genuinely, I'm glad you found this. Hit that subscribe button right now because we put out videos every week that are designed to change the way you think about money, not just give you a list of tips you forget by Tuesday. And if you've been here before, you already know what we're about. So drop a like on this video. It tells YouTube that real people are watching this, and it helps us reach the people who need this most. Before we dive in, I want to ask you something. Think about your current net worth, your investments, your savings, everything you own minus everything you owe. Now ask yourself, do you actually have a timeline to $500,000? Not a vague someday feeling, but an actual number, an actual year. Most people don't, and by the end of this video, you will. So let me start with an analogy, because this concept is one of those things that sounds simple on paper, but is actually profound when you really sit with it. Imagine you're pushing a boulder up a hill, and this hill, for the first half, is brutally steep. Every single inch forward feels like it costs everything you have. You're sweating, your legs are burning, you keep almost sliding back, and there are moments where you genuinely wonder if it's worth it. That's your financial life from zero to about $250,000. Every dollar you save feels like you pulled it out of thin air. Every market dip feels personal. Every unexpected expense feels like a catastrophe, because it is. When you don't have a cushion, a $1,200 car repair isn't just an inconvenience. It's 3 months of progress wiped out. Your brain is literally operating in survival mode during this phase. And here's the thing about survival mode. It's not just a feeling. There's actual neuroscience behind this. Research from Princeton University showed that financial scarcity consumes cognitive bandwidth. It literally takes up mental space in your brain, the same way a heavy task consumes RAM on a computer. You're running slower, making worse decisions, seeing fewer options, not because you're not smart, but because your brain is spending so much energy managing the stress of not having enough that there's less left over for creativity, planning, and long-term thinking. That's why people in financial stress make decisions that look irrational from the outside. It's not a character flaw, it's biology. But now back to that boulder. At some point on the hill, around $500,000 in your investment portfolio, something shifts. The incline starts to level off, and then, almost without warning, it tips, and the boulder starts moving on its own. You're not pushing as hard, you're not grinding as much. The momentum of the thing you've built starts working for you instead of against you. And this is not a metaphor. This is math. Pure, beautiful compounding math. Let me show you exactly what I mean. $500,000 invested at an average annual return of 8%, which is a conservative, realistic long-term average for a diversified index fund portfolio, generates $40,000 per year, passively, without you doing a single thing. $40,000. Let that land for a second. That's not a bonus. That's not a side hustle. That's money that exists purely because you reached a specific number and then did nothing but wait. For a lot of people watching this, $40,000 is close to what they earn at their job in a year. Think about what it would mean if your money was working a second job alongside you, a job that never calls in sick, never asks for a raise, never shows up late. That's what $500,000 does for you at 8%. And here's where it gets interesting, because the first question most people ask is, okay, but how long does it take to get there? And the answer depends on where you're starting, but let me give you a realistic picture for the average person. Let's say you're starting from zero. You're putting away $1,500 a month, which I know sounds like a lot, and we'll talk about how to get there. But at $1,500 a month with an 8% annual return, you reach $500,000 in roughly 18 years. 18 years, that's a long time. I won't pretend it isn't. But here's the part that will blow your mind. Once you're at $500,000, the next $500,000 doesn't take another 18 years. It doesn't even take 10 years. At 8% annual return, $500,000 grows by $40,000 in year one alone. If you never added another single dollar, not one more contribution, and you just left that money alone, you'd have $1 million in roughly 9 years. 9 years. And if you keep contributing, you could be looking at the next $500,000 arriving in as little as 3 years. 3 years versus 18 years. Same person, same discipline, different phase of the journey. This is the rule. This is the shift. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The first $500,000 is almost entirely you. Your effort, your sacrifice, your saying no to the vacation and yes to the contribution. The second $500,000 is almost entirely your money. The work starts to transfer. The leverage kicks in. The boulder crests the hill and gravity takes over. And the reason most people never experience this is not because they're not capable of it. It's because they never understood it well enough to stay in the game long enough to reach the tipping point. Let me talk about what actually changes in your psychology when you hit this milestone, because this is the part that financial content almost never covers, and it's maybe the most important part of all. When your portfolio crosses into serious territory, $500,000, and especially once that passive income number becomes visible and real, something happens to your decision-making. Researchers at the University of Cambridge studied how financial security affects risk tolerance and decision quality, and they found that people with financial buffers make measurably better decisions across almost every domain of life. They negotiate better, they take smarter career risks, they're more creative, they're less reactive, they have more patience. Think about that. The same person, same intelligence, same education, same skill set operates at a fundamentally higher level, simply because the financial pressure valve has been released. This is why I always say that building wealth is not just a financial project, it is a cognitive upgrade. Every dollar you add to your portfolio is, in a very real sense, buying back mental bandwidth. And nowhere is this more visible than in how you relate to your job. Because here's something that most people who are stuck in the cycle don't realize. Desperation is visible. When you walk into a salary negotiation and you need that raise to make rent, your boss can feel it. When you're considering a career move but you can't afford 3 months without income, you stay. When you hate your work but your bank account has nothing to catch you, you endure. And the people who are getting ahead, the ones who seem to catch every break, land every promotion, get every opportunity, a lot of the time it's not because they're smarter, it's because they have options. And having options changes everything about how you carry yourself. There's a phrase I've started using that I want you to write down: walking away money. Walking away money is when your portfolio is big enough that you could walk away from a bad situation without it destroying your life. You don't even have to walk away. Just knowing you could changes everything. Your posture changes, your tone changes. You negotiate from a position of strength instead of desperation. People who have walking away money get treated differently. They get paid differently. Not because the rules are fair, they're not, but because financial confidence is a signal that the world responds to. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Nico, this all sounds great, but I'm not anywhere close to 500,000. I'm trying to keep the lights on. And I hear you. I really do. I've seen so many people start from nothing, genuinely nothing, living paycheck to paycheck, carrying 5-figure credit card debt, and work their way to this milestone. And the most important thing I can tell you is this. The path is not mysterious. The math is not complicated. What's hard is the psychological game, the waiting, the consistency, the not touching it when the market drops 30% and every headline is screaming that everything is falling apart. So let's talk about the practical layer, the actual decisions, habits, and mindset shifts that move the needle. The first thing you have to do, and I mean this is not optional, it is the foundation of everything, is stop optimizing the wrong variable. Most people in their 20s and 30s are obsessed with cutting spending. And yes, spending matters, obviously, but there is a ceiling on how much you can cut. You can only reduce your expenses to zero. The ceiling on your income, on the other hand, is theoretically unlimited. I've watched people spend 5 years grinding down their budget to save an extra $200 a month while their income flatlined, and they wonder why they're not getting anywhere. The highest leverage move you can make in your 20s is to increase your income, not by $50 an hour, not by picking up a weekend gig, but by investing in skills, credentials, or businesses that can dramatically change your earning trajectory. A 30% raise in your salary, compounded over 20 years of investing the difference, can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in your final portfolio. That is not an exaggeration. Run the numbers. It will change how you think about professional development. The second thing is probably the one that's going to feel the most uncomfortable, and that's automating your investment before you ever see it. Not the money left over at the end of the month, not whatever's sitting in your checking account after everything else. I'm talking about a system where your investment contribution leaves your paycheck before it ever has a chance to become a streaming subscription, or a dinner out, or a new pair of shoes that you justified because you had a hard week. The psychological research on this is overwhelming. When money is automated out of sight, the brain stops counting it as available income. You adopt, you adjust, you figure it out. And 6 months later, you'll barely remember what you used to spend that money on. Set up automatic contributions to your index fund, your 401k, your Roth IRA, whatever vehicle makes sense for you on payday. Not the day after payday, payday. Make it the first transaction, not the last. Third, and this one is subtle, but it might be the most powerful thing I say today. You have to stop treating your investments like a savings account you can dip into. I've seen people build up to $50,000, $70,000 and then take a distribution for a kitchen renovation or a car or a wedding that could have been financed differently. And look, I'm not judging the decisions. Life is complicated. But here's what I want you to understand about compounding. It punishes interruptions brutally and rewards continuity almost unfairly. Let me give you a specific number. $100,000 left untouched at 8% for 30 years becomes just over $1 million. The same $100,000 withdrawn and replaced over that period, depending on timing, you could lose $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in final value. That's not a rounding error. That's the difference between retiring comfortably and not retiring at all. The money you leave invested is doing work every single day. The moment you pull it out, that work stops. And in the world of compounding, stopping is not neutral. Stopping is catastrophically expensive. Now let me bring this back to the 500,000 milestone, because I want you to understand what life actually looks like on the other side of it, not in an abstract way, but in a real, human, day-to-day way. Because I think sometimes we talk about these numbers like they're just numbers on a spreadsheet, and we forget what they actually represent in terms of lived experience. When your portfolio is generating $40,000 a year passively, here's what changes. You stop accepting jobs you hate because you can't afford to leave. You stop staying in relationships, professional or personal, out of financial fear. You start making decisions based on what you actually want, what actually aligns with your values, what actually makes use of your skills. And here's the thing that people almost never talk about. You become more generous. When you're in scarcity mode, generosity feels like a threat. Every dollar you give is a dollar that could have been protecting you. But when your money is multiplying on its own, generosity becomes effortless. You tip better, you help family members, you invest in other people's ideas, you support causes you believe in. The financial freedom compounds into a kind of life freedom that is almost impossible to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. I want to tell you about a pattern I've seen over and over again in the personal finance community. There's this phenomenon where people hit somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 in their portfolio, and they genuinely feel like they're almost there. And then the market does something wild, or life happens, or the progress slows, and they start to question whether any of it is working. And this is one of the most dangerous moments in the entire journey, because quitting at $250,000 means you never find out what was waiting for you on the other side. You take the suffering of the first half without ever receiving the reward of the second half. And this is honestly where most people fall off. Not because they're bad with money, not because they made terrible decisions, but because they didn't have a clear enough picture of what the tipping point looked like. They didn't know that at $500,000, the game fundamentally changes. The math changes, the psychology changes, your options change, everything changes. If you can hold on through that middle stretch, that long, grinding middle where progress feels slow and the goal feels impossibly far, you will arrive at a place that feels like a completely different country. And here's something I really want you to sit with. The 500,000 rule is not just about $500,000. It's about understanding that compounding has phases. There's the phase where you are the engine, where your contributions are the primary driver of your portfolio growth. That's the first half of the journey. And then there's the phase where your money becomes the engine, where the interest and returns start to dwarf your contributions. The moment the math flips, the moment your annual return starts exceeding your annual contribution, is the moment you've crossed from the first phase to the second. And in most realistic scenarios, that flip happens right around the $400,000 to $500,000 mark, which means everything before that point is you building the engine, and everything after is the engine running itself. Let me give you one more layer here, because I think it's important to talk about what this milestone means for the big decisions in your life, not just the day-to-day financial stuff. When you have $500,000 working for you, the calculus on every major life decision shifts. Thinking about starting a business, the $40,000 a year in passive income could partially fund your runway while you build it. Thinking about going part-time to spend more time with your kids, you can afford to. Thinking about moving to a lower cost of living area, the math gets even better because that $40,000 goes further. Thinking about negotiating a 4-day work week, you walk into that conversation from a position of security instead of desperation. Every big decision in your life is affected by what your money is doing in the background, and at $500,000, your money is finally doing enough in the background to meaningfully affect those decisions. I've also seen people use this milestone as a psychological anchor in a way that completely transforms their relationship with work. When you actually know in a spreadsheet verified, mathematically certain way that your money is generating $40,000 this year without you lifting a finger, your job becomes optional income, not your only option. Optional income. And that shift from I need this job to survive to I'm here because it's the best use of my time right now and I could leave if I needed to is one of the most profound identity shifts I've ever seen people make. Your manager doesn't scare you the same way. Your performance review doesn't keep you up at night. You speak in meetings with a different kind of confidence. People notice. Opportunities follow. So what do you actually do with all of this? Because I don't want you to watch this video and feel inspired for 2 days and then go back to the same patterns. So let me close with something concrete. The first thing I want you to do today, not this week, today, is open whatever account you have your investments in and look at your current portfolio value. Then I want you to divide that number by 500,000 and write down that percentage. Whether it's 2% or 30% or 80%, that's where you are in the journey to the tipping point. Then I want you to use a compound interest calculator. There are free ones everywhere online, and enter your current balance, your current monthly contribution, and an 8% return. See what year you hit 500,000. Look at that date. Make it real. Because here's what I've learned after talking to people about money. The ones who make it don't always start with the most money or the best job or the most financial knowledge. The ones who make it are the ones who have a clear enough picture of where they're going, that they're willing to endure the grinding, frustrating, seemingly slow middle phase. The ones who actually know that the boulder will eventually crest the hill and start moving on its own. The ones who understand that the first 500,000 is the hardest thing they will ever build, and that everything after that is a fundamentally different game. That knowledge is a kind of protection. It keeps you in the game when everything in you wants to quit. It keeps you contributing when the market is down. It keeps you focused on the 30-year picture when the 30-day picture looks ugly. You are not trying to be rich. You are trying to reach a specific mathematical threshold where your money starts doing more work than you do, where your past self, the version of you who said no to things, who automated the investment, who held on through the dips, starts paying your present self a salary for the discipline you had years ago. That's not a fantasy. That's a calculation. And the only variable that's still undecided is whether you're going to stay in the game long enough to let the math do what the math does. I believe you can. I believe most people watching this are one mindset shift away from a completely different relationship with money. Not because they need to earn more, though that helps. Not because they need to spend less, though that helps too. But because they need to understand what they're actually building toward. And now you do. If this video gave you something, a new way to think about your timeline, a number to aim for, a reason to stay in the game, then do me a favor and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are on the journey to 500,000. I read every single one. And if you want to go deeper on the psychology of compounding and the habits that actually move the needle, watch the video that's coming up on your screen right now. I'll see you there.